Today I'll be going over Chapter 5 of Alanna Nash's book, The Colonel. Chapter 5 is titled, Turning the Duke. Nash says that by 1933, just as Tom Parker joined the Johnny J. Jones carnival world, the once powerful show was facing an uncertain future. By the end of 1930, the Depression had badly hurt Jones's carnival business and had left him deep in debt. Then Jones died unexpectedly on Christmas Day, leaving his young wife, Hodie Hurd, to keep the show going. Hodie was overwhelmed too and suffered a nervous breakdown as the carnival's finances collapsed. By the end of the rough 1933 season, she sold the once great show to E. Lawrence Phillips. Even though many Johnny J. Jones performers were discouraged, Parker was thrilled to be back in the carnival world. Promoting Bert Slover's ponies at a Tampa movie theater suited him, and he was eager enough to wake up at 5:30 a.m., which was a habit that stuck with him for life. Parker wasn't a regular salaried employee with Johnny J. Jones. He worked as an independent contractor and focused right away on making as much money as possible, just like he had done as a young dockhand in Rotterdam. He focused on concessions where the real money could be made. This included food, merchandise, and games, but there was one important difference. Merchandise and game operators bought their booth space by the foot. Food worked on a percentage basis. Larry Davis, the owner of California's largest outfit, Carnival Time Shows, who came to know Parker well in the early 70s through the Showman's League of America, says he started out in a candy stand making candy apples and popcorn. From there, Parker told Davis he moved around the carnival doing whatever work he could find, making snow cones, running rides, and basically doing anything needed to survive. Joe McCannon, a carnival historian who worked on the shows, remembers, "I knew him as a concessionaire." By the time McCannon knew him, Parker had built up a few small concessions, but adding games to his food stand made other showmen suspicious of him. Nash writes, quote, "Concessionaires who ran games were often crooks specializing in flat stores, or games of chance that offered no winning numbers, as gentlemanly agents who sold conversation and bragged about turning the Duke, not just hustling the customer out of his money, but shortchanging the count with a skilled slip of the hand. They were a disgrace to the honest men among them," end quote. Nash says that in his early carnival years, Parker stayed out of trouble and didn't really stand out, but McCannon remembered one odd detail. Parker was using yet another name. McCannon said, "I used to know what it was, but it wasn't Parker. At a showman's convention about 15 years ago, he was the speaker, and I had to introduce him. I said, he was just a so-so concessionaire until he found that boy from Memphis and went into the business of creating names. And I used that name he had on the Jones show. Afterwards, Parker came up and said, 'I didn't know you knew that, Joe.'" Parker may have used another alias because of his AWOL and desertion trouble, and then kept using it during his early carnival days. But to carnival people like Larry Davis, hiding your real name wasn't unusual enough to matter. Veteran concessionaire John Campy said, "You could know a guy 10 years in that era and not know his real name." Nash writes, quote, "Indeed, Jack Kaplan, Parker's best friend throughout his carnival years and an associate for decades to come, never felt the need to ask his true identity. The two slept next to each other in railroad cars for months on end, but Kaplan had no idea what Parker did before the carnival, or even where he came from, although he noted that in 1933 he was still talking like a Dutchman. Brasa wis is los ya ya ya." Parker's refusal to elaborate on his past was considered neither mysterious nor unusual. It was simply part of the carny's silent understanding, end quote. The carnival was an ideal hiding place for people who wanted to protect their identity or secrets, but it was also a dangerous world, and that danger shaped the way carnival people thought and behaved. Nash says Depression-era carnival life was rough, and no one trusted anyone else. People constantly watched their backs, and violence wasn't unusual, and many accepted danger, even death, as just part of the business. Parker identified so strongly with carnival life that even years later, he still sought out the company of concessionaires, midway workers, and sideshow people. Byron Raphael, who would often drive Parker around in the late 1950s, said, "When we were traveling across country, he often took me to these little carnivals that were so small they didn't even have a big tent. He knew where they were, all through the states. And the first thing he would do was to search out the midgets and the freaks. In California, between Barstow and Bakersfield, there were billboards every 100 yards. 'See the thing, half man, half animal.' He took that really seriously. We'd stop and go in there, and it would be very dark, very eerie, and the thing would be this poor, pathetic black person on his hands and knees in a low cage. He had a tail on him and long hair, and when he would growl, it was really frightening. The Colonel loved that, and at these little carnivals, he loved the fat lady and the bearded lady, and he would sit and talk with them for hours. He was a very superstitious person. I remember him being very respectful of the tarot reader. Every place we stopped, there was always one woman who would sit in a little hut and read your fortune. He would say, "This woman is very good. She can read the crystal ball." Then he'd go spend time with the cooks who were making the hot roast beef sandwiches. They all knew him. These were people that he had worked with. Nash says Parker stayed connected to the carnival world for the rest of his life, and he remained active in the Showman's League of America and gave generously to its causes. Campy remembers, "He did a lot of good work for the Showman's League. He was a beautiful guy, a good man, and a friend. Of course, he was an enemy if you were his." But even Parker's enemies had to admit one thing, because the carnival code demanded a certain kind of respect. Larry Davis said, "I think that everyone in our show business world considered Colonel Parker a great man. He was just about the best there was at thinking and figuring things out. I've never met anyone who thought as deeply as the Colonel." Nash says that even after his rough time at Walter Reed, Parker likely had enough discharge money to get by, but his old habit of hustling for cash or a free meal was still very much alive. The elderly locals remembered Parker from those Tampa days as a, quote, rough hustler, selling candy apples, popcorn, or whatever else he could get on the streets to get by. Joan Buchanan West grew up in the area, and her mom told her how Parker kept hustling between carnival jobs, selling potatoes and onions from a pickup truck around Ruskin and Plant City. He bargained with farmers and saved whatever food he could just to keep himself fed. Around this time was when Parker met Louis Peasy Hoffman, who was a special agent for Reuben and Cherry exposition shows and was a well-known carnival advance man. Hoffman, who always had a cigar in his mouth, had a strong reputation for publicity, advertising, and promotion, with several major traveling shows. Nash says Parker may have had a Barnum-like flair, but his real hands-on mentor was Hoffman. Hoffman was friendly and polished and a persistent carnival man who knew how to work games and promotion. By the time they met, Hoffman was a well-dressed front office man who could talk smoothly about anything. That stood out to Parker, especially since he had developed a noticeable stutter while trying to remake himself as an American. And Hoffman taught Parker one of his biggest lessons: know the important people in every town, no matter how small. To Hoffman, especially in the Southern Carnival circuit, that was how the world really worked. Hoffman also showed Parker that carnival business often depended on having a, quote, fixer, someone who could get people out of jail, smooth over legal trouble, or arrange bribes when needed. Oscar Davis, who was the promoter, remembered that Parker watched closely how carnival people handled authority and legal trouble. He understood those tricks could be useful later in life, especially in negotiations. Nash says Parker realized the real power in carnival life was in the front office, like Hoffman, and not just working the lot. He wanted that kind of position, too, where he could be important and respected and dressed like a big shot. He admired Hoffman's confidence and smooth way of handling people, but what he really wanted to learn was how Hoffman sold advertising. So he offered to drive Hoffman around in exchange for being taught the business. The lessons started slowly because they worked for different shows, but they reconnected in Tampa during the winter. Soon they were teaming up in the off-season to work smaller non-railroad carnivals called Turks. Soon, Parker began copying Hoffman's style closely, trying to look like a polished front office promoter. In photos, he appears sharply dressed in a suit and tie and fedora, with the cigar image coming soon after. Nash says Parker's cigar made him look tougher and more confident, but also drew attention away from his weakening chin line. Joey, Hoffman's son, who was also a carnival man, said, "You could say he patterned himself after my father a bit, but later on he attributed all of his dirty tricks to my dad. Parker was a big, likable Dutchman and a nice fellow, but he was really nothing but a half-assed promoter who eventually lucked into a hot property." In his second winter with Hoffman, Parker bragged about publicity stunts he created, including a fake Saturday night wedding on top of a Ferris wheel. It was staged as if two young carnival sweethearts were getting married. Parker's fake Ferris wheel wedding stunt became popular with carnivals around the country, and its success made him hope he might finally earn a front office job. Instead, the hard-nosed carnival bosses saw him as a renegade who had simply gotten lucky with one good idea. Jack Kaplan remembers, "He always had quick ideas and he was quick on talking. He wanted to be a big man in this country. He always said, 'Them dummies can do it, why can't I?'" Nash writes, quote, "If Parker had not yet earned the respect of management, he found in Kaplan the first of a long line of flunkies who would eventually make up a sort of entourage, men who would work cheap for the privilege of being around him and his milieu, be on call 24 hours a day, suffer silently any form of verbal or emotional abuse, and never question his authority. Usually, like Kaplan, they were younger men and of small stature, intimidated by Parker's size, girth, and aggressive personality. They were yes men to the extreme, perfectly suited to his deep-seated need to control, subjugate, and bully. Parker hoped having a subservient gopher like Kaplan would boost his profile with the carnival brass and dignitaries, men who had the title of colonel in front of their names to designate them as important figures. End quote. By 1934, Parker was bouncing between different carnivals just to keep working. The smaller shows were often more corrupt and so broke that some couldn't even afford enough tires to move all their trucks at once. Under these circumstances, Parker badly wanted a front office job like Hoffman's, but he couldn't quite get there. Hoffman helped him get a chance with Reuben and Cherry, and Parker sold some ads on the Jones Show, but the higher-level carnival job seemed out of reach. So he kept hustling for whatever work he could get, even small cherry pie jobs from other carnival people, including lowly tasks like guarding railroad cars. He kept getting deeper into the secretive carnival world, and he and Kaplan even used carny slang to talk business in front of outsiders without being understood. He also worked as a sideshow pitchman for a while, partly to train himself out of his stutter and Dutch accent so he could sound more American. Nash writes, quote, "He also ran a mitt camp, or fortune-telling booth, tracing his customers' occupations by the calluses on their hands. He could look into the eyes of the gullible, read the life history on their face, and communicate with them silently, almost controlling the very words they said." End quote. That's it for Chapter 5. Stay tuned for Chapter 6, which is titled Dancing Chickens, Toothless Lions, and Rodeo Cowboys. See you then.